November 2020. I had an idea that got me thinking. What is the best way to learn more about my subject, educate others, and also create something useful and valuable? How do I expand my horizon a little bit further? And how do I do all that simultaneously? There were many viable options, but I decided to start the podcast. Of course, podcasting isn't something new. But still, depending upon the genre or style of your podcast, the amount of work involved changes. I chose to do interviews, which also meant that I needed a lineup of guests even before I could launch. So I reached out to some of my close contacts to be my first few guests.
My friend from across the ditch, Verity Craft, was more than helpful. She was excited to be the first one to go. We talked about thought leadership, how to transform your ideas into thought leadership. That was the first episode. It was followed by another episode with Dr. Michael Thiemann, straight from Germany. We talked about disruption, trends, and innovation, especially how you can take advantage of trends to innovate. Then it was Anshuman Tiwari, and I still remember the story he told in the third episode, highlighting the importance of asking the right questions and not jumping to conclusions too early in the transformation project. That episode was followed by a short and punchy discussion with Sheetal Mehra about executive presence and communication. By the time I finished recording all these episodes, I had already launched the podcast. Many of you were kind enough to be my first listeners, so thank you for being there. And yes, I cannot emphasize enough the power of useful feedback. Thankfully, many of you have been sending your comments and observations, which has been quite helpful in making those small little tweaks here and there. I also did a little experiment on the sidelines. While doing all this, what can I say? I am an experimentation addict. So I started creating short videos to promote each of the podcast episodes. Quite frankly, there has been a mixed response to those videos. Some people liked the concept, while others admired the production quality. Some liked the preamble style, while many others were neutral to all of that. I still don't know if it was a good idea or not, but I can tell you one thing. I enjoyed creating all those videos.
But sometimes it was quite uncomfortable, and many of them also tested my patience.
He has worked with Nonstop News London. In my earlier conversations, Anjali Sharma from Singapore and I had agreed to record one of the first few episodes, but as luck would have it, we had to reschedule it a few times. But I'm glad that eventually we were able to do it. So in the sixth episode, we talk about storytelling from the business context. I particularly liked this conversation because of two reasons. The first reason was I have had a hard time in my previous life convincing others to accept and adapt to many pragmatic changes in the business world. It was always a challenge, and I wish I had this conversation 10 years prior. The second reason I liked this conversation was due to its relevance to today's environment. Converting someone's knowledge into understanding is so important. and properly chosen stories can help you do that.
This journey with many other interesting and knowledgeable people continued for several weeks. Klaus Rasted and I talked about innovation cycle. Brian Mattimore gave so many ideas to generate more ideas, and Todd Churches helped to understand the importance of visual thinking. A conversation with Gautam Ganglani about breaking bread gave a new twist to networking. Then you heard some ideas on public speaking from Miriam Chancellor. Maria Papacosta from Greece reminded us of the power of authenticity in communication. I also covered a few interesting topics such as decluttering with Sahil Mehta and being the key person of influence with Glenn Carlson.
I met new people almost every week, learned many new things, and I was enjoying every bit of it. And then it happened. I felt that I'm probably falling behind my schedule. There were a few instances where some guests declined, some agreed but didn't even show up. That's when I reached out to my network for help. At that time, the people who helped me produce this podcast also helped me continue doing it. Verity and Gautam suggested many guests. Maria connected me to Ravin and Oleg. Oleg connected me to John Spence, and so on. Greg connected me to a few other guests as well. You see, the true test of your network is when you are in a situation like this. Then who comes for help and who ignores can tell a lot about them.
I connected with Dr. Oleg and we talked about vision and visionary leadership. Similarly, I spoke with Sudhir Rao and he imparted a few leadership lessons. Then I met John Spence. There we had an interesting conversation on the adaptability quotient. I was also able to discuss some of the heavy and deeper topics. I spoke about AI and AI ethics with Christina Larkin from EY. Petra Zink spoke about portfolio careers for individuals, while I had an interesting conversation with Robert Hillard from Deloitte about virtual office and the future of work.
Then there was one conversation that seemed to be out of lane, but it wasn't. It was the episode with Sarah Tabet from Schneider Electric on diversity and inclusion. It seems to be a long arc to draw when connecting innovation, communication, and technology with D&I. But if you look carefully, that is not the case. Because without having a diversity of opinions and a truly inclusive team, I cannot see everything working properly. Innovation will stifle, communication will fall flat, and technology will create more problems than solutions. I have also noticed one thing about podcasts that other people produce. Sometimes, in the quest to stick to their niche, they get rather too narrow. They go beyond a point where, unfortunately, things start to repeating. Going deeper on a subject is one thing, but there is also a merit in going wider at times. It reminds me of a famous quote that says, "An expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less, until he knows everything about nothing." The point is, if you do not take the chance to expand your horizon, you may become irrelevant for all the wrong reasons. Although I was working on this podcast series, I also realized that there were quite a few complementing aspects. For example, there was video. Then there was an experimentation aspect to podcasts. So while I was running a few experiments myself, I thought it would be more interesting to hear what others have found. In the meantime, while speaking at a conference in Europe, of course virtually, I met Richard Midson. As I came to know about his adventures in podcasting, I thought it would be a good idea to know more. So we spoke about that in an episode about podcasts on my podcast. A podcast about podcasts on my podcast. What a tongue twister.
If that wasn't enough, I also spoke about video on this podcast. And for doing that, I had Julian Mather on the show. He shared some of the tips on creating videos with a smartphone. And then I ended up talking with Dr. John Molidor about the brain. That was a fantastic conversation on so many counts. Not only he busted so many myths, but he also helped with ideas on how to use brain science for being an effective communicator.
Oh, by the way, do you remember the story of bunch of engineers who started a toilet cleaning business? No? You may have missed the episode with Praveen Shekhar on Outlier Marketing. Innovation is not just about coming up with new products or services. It is way more than that. Now the last episode, which was with Ravin Jesuthasan, we talked about the future of work. And while talking, Ravin touched upon one of the critical aspects of the future of work, strategic collaboration. He also told the story of a partnership between Siemens and Disney. Excellent example of strategic collaboration. I have been very fortunate to have an audience from 41 countries and 232 cities for season 1 of this podcast. And when you put these 25 episodes together, it is about 19 hours of an audio content. Quite a lot to consume, I would say, but hey, you can always pick and choose and play that at double speed, right? Anyway, it's a wrap for the first season of the ICT podcast. And the next one is coming soon, in a few weeks from now. So if you would like to suggest some guests, please send me a direct message. I will consider all your suggestions. And yes, I truly appreciate your support until this point. In fact, I'm counting on it for the future seasons. One more thing, you can surely expect a little bit better performance in the next season. Because I guess after all this, I'm a little bit wiser now. What do you think?